Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Captain Don Dobias.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that warm welcome. Thank you very much for coming out on Halloween and potentially overcoming perhaps some celebratory hangovers for Washington National fans. To share with us here our efforts to work together and integrate spaceflight into a commercial national airspace system. My name is Don Dobias. I'm the chairman of our ALPA's, the Airline Pilot Association Air Traffic Services group. It's a group of subject matter experts in air traffic services, and we like to focus on that and help solve problems working with the industry related to that. On behalf of the Airline Pilot Association and the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, we welcome each of you for making the extra effort needed to come out here today and share with us your thoughts and your thinking and being present with us. We are very glad to see you. Please rise now for the national anthems of Canada and the United States of America. Thank you very much. I encourage you to be seated, or you can remain standing if you wish. You know, I tell you, I still get emotional listening to the anthem. One of our most important challenges facing our nation and our aviation system is the entry of new kinds of operations into the national airspace. Some of these entrants are indeed brand new. They include unmanned aircraft systems, urban mobility concepts, and they hold the promise of innovation in everything from bridge safety inspections to agricultural spraying to intracity on-demand transportation. Other operations are actually old friends, returning at a much higher tempo. And that is certainly true for commercial space launches, which have been around since 1957. And so I'll go out on a limb and remind you that, or point out that I was only 2 years old then. And I still remember my dad giving me a physics book on the cover of which was a bright blue space background and a bright shimmering planet. I don't know which one though. Sorry, I didn't read it that closely, I guess. But it was a special time, and it's funny to be here and representing these transitions and trying to help resolve that with you. The innovations go far beyond just orbital satellite launches. Proposals for operations range from space tourism to suborbital transcontinental transportation to the launch of thousands of microsatellites, offering improvements to already really good global telecommunication systems. I'm pleased today that we're bringing together this aviation industry and the commercial space industry to discuss the introduction of the higher levels of space activities through our national airspace. Our goal is to have the collaborative discussion on the way forward to integrate all these innovative ideas into our national airspace while at the same time maintaining and improving the level of safety for operations happening at the lower levels. And I must say that we have a lot of mutual benefits that we can gain by doing so. We believe that with better understanding of each community's objectives and points of pain, and with collaboration and good faith, we can achieve both of these objectives, integrate space launches while maintaining safety. Included in your packet of information is the agenda, along with the bios of the speakers. And I must say, in my contract to do this, I insisted on having a separate piece of paper just for mine, because I know you all really care. It's really just about me today. Anyway, I was late on my submission for the bio. That's why that happened. And so anyway, and the interest could be good for a bookmark. Maybe you could use it as a coaster. The paper is really water resistant, so it could help there. Anyway, in the interest of giving you as much time for dialogue as possible, we'll ask that you refer to those bios instead of, we're not asking the moderators to do introductions of every speaker. That's the purpose of sharing that information with you. We want to make your day here as informative as possible. Do not hesitate to let me or the members of the ALPA staff who are around to know of your concerns or needs, and we'll do our best to have timely and effective resolution of whatever issue you may be having. Reviewing today's program this morning, we start with opening addresses from the Airline Pilots Association and the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, followed by a networking break, and refreshments will be available at the back of the room during that break. By the back, really, I must say that's over to the side. Right there, you may have seen it if you did partake of the breakfast opportunity that was provided. Next, we'll have an introductory panel which will describe the issues and shortfalls that we've identified with today's methods of handling space launches. And then we'll be joined by the Honorable Ted Cruz, the chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Aviation and Space. I'm really looking forward to hearing that perspective from the high level on that. After that, we'll have some lunch. In the afternoon, we're going to have a panel to discuss streamlining the accommodation of space launches in the near term, followed by a second networking break. Third, last but not least panel, will look toward the future with the commercial space where we visualize it being integrated into the NAS and the technology investment necessary to make that reality occur. At this point, at that point later in the day, not at this point, like right now, we're going to be joined by Dr. Scott Pace, the Executive Secretary of the National Space Council, and that will be followed up by some summary and closing comments facilitated by Joe DePete, Scott, or Eric, and me. So anyway, during the question and answer periods, when we offer those, we have 2 microphones right here. We encourage you to come out and identify who you are and state your question, or if you want to say a comment, go ahead. Let's try to do one at a time during those opportunities. If you're not comfortable with that, or you'd rather do so, you should find in the papers there a phone number to which you may text your question, and then we will relay that here, and then we'll have the panel members respond accordingly. So before all that, that's the overview for today. I invite now Captain Joe DePete, and President of ALPA, and Eric Stallmer, the President of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, to set the stage. I was a little premature with that, so hey, glad to see you guys up here. Eric is the president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. It is the largest trade organization dedicated to promoting the development of commercial spaceflight. And the CSF also works to develop industry standards and share best practices in the pursuit of ever higher levels of safety. Eric has been appointed to the National Space Council User Advisory Committee and serves as the co-chair of the FAA Airspace Integration Aviation Rulemaking Committee. Eric was also a member of the Space Launch and Recovery Spaceport ARCs as well. Eric is also an officer in the U.S. Army Reserve with over 20 years of service, and he was awarded the Bronze Star for service in combat operations in Iraq. Currently serves as in the office of the Deputy Chief of Staff, Army for Logistics. On behalf of ALPA, and for me personally, we thank you very much for your continuing service. I must contrast this. We have a common purpose, but I served for 7 years. I was, maybe you could say I have friends in low places, but I was a chief warrant officer too in the Colorado Army National Guard. The highest level I ever got was, pilot in command of a Huey, a HH-1 Iroquois helicopter. So, and it was a joy for me to be able to serve in that banner, but thank you. Since January 2019, Captain Joe DePete has served as the 11th president of the Airline Pilot Association International. We represent 63,000 professional airline pilots in the United States and Canada. Joe also serves on the FAA's Next Gen Advisory Committee and Drone Advisory Committee. From 2015 through 2019, Captain DePete also served as the first vice president and national safety coordinator for the Airline Pilots Association. In that role, he led ALPA's efforts on safety, security, pilot assistance, and jump seat-related issues. He also served as ALPA's representative on the EQIP 2020 ADSB implementation activity, and he was a member of the Aviation Security Advisory Committee as well as a member of the Next Gen Advisory Committee subcommittee. Oh my goodness, he's a little bit of an underperformer, wouldn't you say? Anyway, Captain DePete has flown and served as a line check airman on the Airbus 300 and 310 wide-body cargo jet for FedEx Express. And prior to FedEx, Captain DePete flew the Lockheed KC-130 while serving in the United States Marine Corps. Now, we have a bond here, too, you may not know about. But when I was in the Air Force, I was a helicopter pilot, and I air refueled behind C-130s. Right. They had a slow-speed drogue versus your high-speed. Anyway, and I also ran the Marine Corps Marathon. I even finished it, So, anyway, guys, welcome to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, everybody. Good morning. And it was great to see everybody last night. I will add my congratulations. I'm just glad the Yankees didn't make it. I would have been conflicted. I would have been totally conflicted. But So got you here on Halloween. I got my Halloween tie on. You got your Halloween tie on. We compared socks too. We both have space socks. We didn't know that. We just happened to shop in the same place anyway. But hey, I just wanted to thank you, Don Dobias. Where are you, dear Don? For all you do for the association. Don is a bit of an underachiever himself in terms of he runs our air traffic services group under the auspices of Steve Jangelis, our national safety chairman. And yes, I did notice that you got a card and I didn't. So but it was well deserving, Don. It was very, so I do appreciate the introduction. I appreciate that. And I would like to welcome everybody here today, this morning. I've been looking forward to this for a very, very long time. ALPA is obviously very pleased to co-host this event with the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. And we're honored that we'll be joined by a notable list of expert panelists, as well as speakers, including Senator Cruz and Dr. Scott Pace, as you heard earlier. And it is a distinct pleasure for me to be able to share the stage with you, President Stallmer. It was not too long ago, I think I attended my first ComStack meeting, and I was really inspired. I've been a space aficionado for a really long time, and after hearing what was going on in the discussions, I realized that there was an opportunity for a discussion between commercial aviation and commercial space. But anyway, this year, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary, I don't know if you know that, of the Apollo 11 moon landing. Around the planet, and I remember this, millions marveled that humans had, for the very first time, walked on the lunar surface. We were just talking in there about this event and how fast, I was glued to the TV. Now, I think people become inured to a lot of this. Technology is such that people, distracted in a lot of different ways. But I remember Walter Cronkite, who had a very poetic way of delivering the news, I would say, right? He always made it seem, he gave the context in a larger human way, and I'm always fascinated by that. But those, who fully understood the risk at the time, however, marveled even more at the accomplishment of sending 2 astronauts into space and safely returning them back to Earth. Now, today we would recoil from any consideration of a different outcome, if you think about it. I mean, we just wouldn't expect it. But there are those at the time who had no alternative to be prepared for the unthinkable. And in late July of 1969, President Nixon's speechwriter worked to be ready should disaster strike. He drafted an address to the nation in the event that the astronauts were left marooned on the moon. And the opening line read, can't do my Nixon imitation, I won't do that. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery, but they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. The prospect of that happening today almost seems too painful to contemplate, but that line, hope for mankind, or humankind rather, in their sacrifice. And as we all know, thankfully, this speech never had to be given, but the concept of sacrifice by both early pioneers and modern practitioners in our industry resonates, I'm sure, with each of you who work in commercial space, and it holds an equal meaning for airline pilots in our industry as well. Carrying a deep respect for the sacrifices made by those who came before us is just one example of the common ground shared by commercial space and aviation as we both pursue safe travels in the sky. So 50 years ago, the Apollo 11 spacecraft transited the U.S. national airspace as it soared into Earth's orbit. Today, when spacecraft begin their trek skyward, they still transit the national airspace. And it's an extraordinarily safe first step in the journey beyond Earth. And it's important to remember why the national airspace is so safe. It's because it was an act of will. We made it that way. So from our start in 1931 here at ALPA, the motto of the Airline Pilots Association has been, schedule with safety. Consider that while they were excellent aviators, half of our union's founding members perished in aviation accidents. These first airline pilots were pushed to fly beyond the bounds of safety, and they paid for it with their lives. And for this reason and others, ALPA pilots consider ourselves to be entrepreneurs in the business of aviation safety. Indeed, few have taken greater risks than airline pilots to ensure the safety of flight. Now, we respect and have helped create the regulations that have helped make flying so safe. But we will never stop pushing ourselves and others to keep it that way and improve on it. So on every flight, airline pilots rely on our training and on our experience to evaluate our equipment and judge the operating environment. And the flight, get this now, the flight doesn't take off until the pilot in command says it's safe to take off. We make those decisions every single day. So more broadly, as the largest non-governmental aviation safety organization in the world, ALPA pilots also advance safety-centered aviation policy with airline managements, regulators, and many governmental organizations. So from the line pilot perspective, we hold and assert our expertise and authority like no other organization. Both domestically and internationally, we make certain that our perspective is considered and our expertise is consulted in all areas of aviation safety, aviation security, and pilot assistance. Through its history, the airline industry has improved safety by reacting to accidents. ALPA helped develop and hone a forensic accident investigation process that's designed to identify all contributing factors to an accident, not a single cause. After the investigatory bodies do their work, we determine and evaluate the changes necessary to improve safety. And then we ensure those changes are implemented. For example, when Congress directed the FAA to review the 2009 Colgan 3407 accident and 30 others, it found shortcomings in airline pilot qualifications and training. We readily admit that. And we knew that they had played a role in virtually all those accidents. In response, our industry improved pilot qualification and training regulations. And as a result, the past decade has been the safest era in U.S. air transportation history. I keep using my soundbite of we have moved, since 2009, over 2/3 of the world's population here in the U.S. alone in metal tubes in the lowest stratosphere without a fatality. It's an extraordinary accomplishment when you consider all the moving parts in the aviation ecosystem. So, and all three parts of this equation, investigating, identifying, and implementing, having fun yesterday. We were doing a lot of yelling last night. Everybody in my building, we were banging pots on the balcony and having a ball. And implementing are equally important. But the final action, putting changes into place, that's the critical part, right? Unless we follow through on what's needed to improve safety, the legacy of those who sacrificed will remain unfulfilled. So this forensic approach to advancing safety has definitely had dramatic results. But learning from accidents is not the only way or the best way that we can achieve a safer system. In fact, by collecting and analyzing data, and I saw my MITRE friend out there, Dean, where are you? Is that over here? We now identify risk and address it before accidents happen. This proactive, data-driven, risk-predictive approach is the future of aviation safety. So, through the Commercial Aviation Safety Team and the Aviation Safety Information Analysis and Sharing Program, or SIAS, labor, airlines, manufacturers, industry trade groups, and the regulator, the FAA, collaborate to address risks. They analyze data from accident investigations, as well as safety reporting programs, which are extremely important because they identify the weak points. As we have fewer and fewer accidents, the data we get from these voluntary safety action reports become more and more critical because they identify those risk points, those choke points. The CAST model uses data to develop an understanding and the best practices to avoid future accidents. So, now, I was very pleased when, Eric, when you accepted ALPA's invitation to address our executive board early this month. Executive board at ALPA is all our 35 MEC chairmen that come in, governing body. And President Stallmer made it clear that the Commercial Spaceflight Federation regards safety as the most important part of its business. Another example of the common ground we share in aviation and in commercial space. ALPA and the aviation industry recognize our responsibility to share the safety lessons we've learned so that others don't have to repeat them. Our union is dedicated to facilitating the safe integration of new and expanding users of the national airspace system. This commitment applies to all users, including unmanned aircraft systems, or drones, hyper and supersonic flight, and of course, commercial space. By working together, the aviation and commercial space industries have an opportunity to use a data-driven, risk-predictive approach to safely integrating commercial space into our national airspace system. Now, when he spoke with ALPA's leaders, President Stallmer expressed frustration with federal policy and regulations that fail to reflect the current environment, equipment, technology, and demands. And we share in that same frustration in aviation. Don't get me started on that, because I've made so many visits to see the administrator of late. Apparently, even when you have things pretty well spelled out in FAA reauthorization, there are still hurdles to go. But this is just more common ground between the two of us and the two groups, commercial space and aviation, and we both want to pursue, obviously, safe skies. So, while we have far too many examples, one area in which policy and action is profoundly affecting the safety and efficiency of the national airspace is NextGen. In my September testimony before the U.S. Senate Aviation and Space Subcommittee, I underscored for lawmakers that a significant portion of U.S. aircraft lack the equipment needed to use NextGen procedures. As a result, pilots and air traffic controllers are too often, they need to develop workarounds, basically making up for these equipment shortfalls to allow us to operate outdated equipment in today's extremely complex airspace. Now, everyone in this room recognizes that today's flight environment is more dynamic than ever. Factors that influence our flight are constantly changing, such as the directions from air traffic control, weather, equipment malfunctions, airport congestion, and flight diversions, just to name a few. The need to perform avoidable workarounds in the context of this complex airspace erodes a pilot's ability to react nimbly to the unexpected. The situation also forces us to accept increased risk. Now, I've seen it from inside the cockpit. I'm line check airman, and Steve, you know, and Don, you've seen it. Depending on the equipage of the aircraft and what we're assigned to do, both the heads go down, and we start trying to make this 486 computer figure out the math problem, right? And in the meantime, the jet's moving forward. So it's a distraction almost at times not to have the necessary equipment to fully exploit the capabilities of NextGen. You know, I'm a NextGen fan. I believe that, while not for the same purposes that, say, maybe the airlines look for it, for increased throughput, but I think it really increases safety because it increases our situational awareness by giving us extremely robust decision-making tools. Simple, right? So, and I speak to Secretary Chow a lot, so I was honored to be appointed by Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chow to the FAA's NextGen Advisory Committee this past July. I underscored to the members then how urgently we need requirements for equipping aircraft with the technology to support modern procedures, in addition to stable and reliable funding. When we think about where we are and the opportunities that lie ahead, in many ways, this old style of government is just standing in the way. And the fact that you're shutting down the government from time to time, it's just so, you know, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's just the worst thing you could do. In fact, that's why I felt compelled to go on CNN and describe that we have created this incredibly dynamic risk predictive model that pulls together, you know, through sheer wool, all the different stakeholders in a very complex ecosystem, aviation ecosystem, with a lot of moving parts. And now when I need to see it most, when I need to look into this model, I got blinders on now. The reporting stopped. It was really problematic for me, knowing what I had learned as heading the association's safety through the benefit of these fine gentlemen down here in the first row. He taught me well. But the more I knew, the more it bothered me. That was the thing, right? It's what you know. And I tried to make that case. So the bottom line is we need next gen now, right? Now gen, as it's often called, especially as we integrate commercial space and new users such as UAS. And the current lack of modern procedures affects how airspace is managed during launches, which is why I'm bringing it up in the first place. We're still segregating the airspace, forcing aircraft to go around huge swaths, bluntly, pick a big swath of airspace, and, or wait until the launch is over. And my point is, I believe, and I think that's been shared, that many times I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and capability that exists right now to take first steps, and I think that's outlined in our, well, I guess I left it on my desk, but today our white paper came out and kind of explains some of that philosophy. But I believe that there are capabilities that exist today to more dynamically manage the airspace. Pretty simple. But they're still trying to figure out how to integrate the space data integrator. By the time they figure that out, it will be. How long have we been working on that, Eric? How long has that been going on?
Seems like a while.
A little bit of a time. Right. I mean, I don't know if you know, but they have to manually take the information that comes out of the space data integrator and walk it across the room, right? Sneakerware. Sneakerware. I love that. I'm going to use it. Oh, that's great. Really? United States of America, huh? Wow. We're finally now just thinking about not having to go to Russia to launch an astronaut. I mean, anyway, that's the one thing I must say about the president's 4 space directors in 1 year's time, right? About 4 space directors who came out, so it's very promising. It's just such an opportunity, and I honestly think they may not. We need to take the bull by the horns together, both sides, these industries, and come up with a plan that doesn't seem to exist at this point, and point the direction forward and demand it. The potential for humankind just can't be ignored, and it's just slowing us down too much. So anyway, so we got a snapshot of what this means in real terms, in terms of when they close off these big pieces of airspace. And from a single 2018 Falcon Heavy launch, not blaming anybody here, certainly not in this room, but there were 563 delayed flights, 35,000 additional miles flown, 4,600 minutes of delay, and more than 5,000 square miles were affected. And it doesn't have to be that way. It just doesn't have to be that way. In my marine mind, all right, give me a crayon, I'll draw this out for you. I just don't see, I think we have the tools right now to open up the airspace based on what the risk model looks like and close it behind it and just keep that moving bubble. And as that 10 to the minus whatever it is begins to come to the other 10 to the minus 9, that bubble just eventually disappears. It just disappears. I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but so our sectors share more common ground than ever right here on this particular issue, I believe. And believe me, and Jim Muncie, if I say something wrong, okay, it's not intentional. I am just so consciously aware of wanting to use the right language to maintain an atmosphere of collaboration. So if I misstate, it would be due to my own ignorance, okay? So when I mention integration, I don't mean integration necessarily in the concept that we think. I understand, this airspace system, I'm off script, there we go. This airspace system was not designed, it was designed for us. It was designed so it's very difficult to fast forward, right? Because think about where we began, where this industry began. We had a similar experience. It was the same thing, but all the resources, everything got poured into this. And now you have this amazing capability that you're developing with far-reaching, prospects for humanity. And you take like a square peg and try to shove it in a round hole in a day. It's just not, But we need to take steps, right? We need to set steps forward, baby steps, the crawl, walk, run kind of concept. And I think as long as we keep staying together, I'm not saying we always agree on everything, but and everything that you hear too. Where's Sabula? Is he here? Andy? He's not here yet? Oh, so I could talk about A4A freely? Okay. We're not A4A, right? we're pilots. We love hiring faster. Most of us are extremely curious. Now, we're heavily invested in safety, right? But we get the challenge that everybody's facing, right? And we don't want to be in the way, but we want to help. So, anyway, but let's put it this way. Aviation can't tolerate delays and reroutes, and commercial space can't tolerate months of coordination and approvals necessary to launch a rocket. I mean, it's just, in our new white paper, we go through the detail of what it takes to launch a rocket these days. It's pretty involved. And, as it probably should be, but it is way too long a process, way too long a process. So both sectors, we need to continue to work together to operate safely, obviously. And we need to learn about, and this is the most important thing, and I think this is the fundamental underlying thing about collaboration, is that we need to learn from each other, right? We need to hear each other, right? And understand the operational needs that you have, and understand your working environment, our working environment. And I think that's the step to trying to figure out and solve problems, right? And the way we will advance together to basically integrate commercial space launches into the National Airspace System. So on behalf of ALPA members, I've attended, as I mentioned earlier, the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, or CONSTAC, that I'm trying to get on. I'm biggest proponent, I'm telling you. And listening to that dialogue, like I said earlier, it really opened my eyes. I just saw such an opportunity, because they were talking like in a bubble, almost in a way. No criticism or anything like that, but I just kind of thought, oh yeah, that happened to us. I remember, I read Flying the Line. I remember we have a couple of books called Flying the Line 1 and Flying the Line 2, which describe our history and all the changes that we were doing. And it didn't seem unfamiliar at all. And oh, by the way, having very strong-willed CEOs at the heads of many of these companies, well, that's not new to us, trust me. The Juan Tripps of the world, and your Frank Lorenzos and folks like that. I know would never compare any of the wonderful people that head these companies, Blue Origin, SpaceX, and Virgin, to Frank Lorenzo. Let me erase that from your mind for a second. Redact that, please, because that's not what I meant. But you know what I'm saying. These are visionaries. These are people who are thinking, 10, 50 years ahead. So I love that. I love that. But to get from point A to point B without zigzagging, you need to define A and B. And in this case, we can do little steps leading to the destination. So on behalf, so I saw this opportunity, and I knew that ALPA could probably step in and help facilitate a discussion. So I went back to my safety team, and they said, what are you talking about, Willis, right? So I come up there, and I said, no, this is really, and obviously they're safety focused and everything. I said, but shared this vision with them and said, this has to be done. It isn't an if, it has to be done. We got to start somewhere. And God knows ALPA is if one thing ALPA does, it's unity building. That's our bread and butter. We're organizers, right? We try to represent workers and the concept of the dignity of work. So we're big on that. So we know how to do that. And I saw the common commitment for safety, saw that right off the bat. I was really impressed. And the desire to modernize regulations. So in order to have that happen, we could and we should continue to work together to integrate commercial space into national airspace the right way. And I always pick on Dan Elwell, but remember at the ComStack meeting last time, Dan talked about safety in an interesting context. He said, safety, it bears repeating. If safety is not the hinge on which your company turns, you will not survive. The safest businesses in the long run are the most profitable. Not to say you don't stumble along the way, because certainly we did. I just mentioned half of the people died, right? So it happens. When you cut corners, you're actually cutting profits. It might not catch up with you right away, but make no mistake, it will, and it will do so in spectacular fashion. I mean, I was wondering what he was thinking about then, but I think we all know what he might have been thinking about, because he's had that on his mind now for a while. You just have to look at the news and see what the discussions are about the MAX, right? So Anyway, it's an opportunity, and I hate passing up opportunities. So today's conference, this is the next step in this effort, right? We talked about this. We said, we held a few meetings at first, and in fact, I even held them separately. I had commercial aviation first, make sure A4A and everybody was cool, and nobody was going to panic, and make sure we know what we're all getting into. But when I described it, and then I asked, you folks were great. You were just like, let's go. Let's do it. Let's talk about it. And so this was the next step, too. So we had several meetings. We tried to join forces, came up with some ideas to offer the FAA on ways that might be able to do things better. And so here we have the opportunity to better understand each other's operational needs and constraints, because that's the key, right, to solving the problems. So our success in this important work will help us deliver on our predecessors' legacy of sacrifice that I mentioned earlier on. Or else why do this, right? I mean, this is really, truly what it's about. It will also enable us to realize a long-term shared vision in which commercial space becomes another operator in the national airspace system, fully integrated. And together, we can ensure that space launches are filed and flown with minimal impact on aviation. We can do that probably right now. And our agenda is designed today to enable us to explore such topics as space launch process improvements, importance of data sharing, and how investments in technology can help communications and surveillance. I'll give you a recent example of technology improvements, all right? And from our view from the flight deck, this is from pilot's view, all right? Before, I'm gonna give you the before and the after. Before, air traffic controllers responsible for flights over the ocean have been looking at displays created from estimates of aircraft positions based on flight plan and position reports. God, I hated position reports. Provided every 12 minutes. Jim, you know that? I mean, that's just the way it is. Today, since the introduction of space-based ADS-B earlier this year, air traffic controllers can see each aircraft every few seconds, right? Well, what does that do? Well, it's one of the tools is, CNS, communication, navigation, and surveillance, that we need to begin to dynamically manage the airspace. Where's my AirTron buddy? There he is, right there. Vishal. Vishal helps us with some ADS-B work, space-based ADS-B, representing Ariane, right, as well. Fine man. I don't know if you know Vishal, but he was the chief of staff under Chairman Hart at the NTSB. This man knows his business. And so anyway, it's a very strong proponent of it when it's safely integrated. So our ability to better track aircraft has obviously greatly improved the safety of all operations. It'll be especially benefit in search and rescue operations and scenarios to help locate missing aircraft, which, as you know, was needed in Air France 447 and Malaysian 370, which they still haven't found, right? I mean, we don't know what happened to that airplane. So, and I love that. People used to walk up to me, Captain DePete, why, how come I could find my phone when it's lost, and you can't find this jumbo jet? And, good point. So, but in addition to this technology that has enabled the trials to be conducted to reduce airplane separation in North America, this is going to be a big step. Now I'll say if, big if for you guys, don't get nervous down there on that fur, but if these trials are successful, they will greatly improve efficiency while enhancing safety. Just a matter of fact. And if we can condense the space, move the space, the tracks around a little bit, when a space launch happens, I see possibilities. I just see the possibilities of better managing that airspace. And in these ways and others, we realize the same types of safety and efficiency benefits as we integrate commercial space launches. And I know that everyone here understands that the future success of both commercial aviation and space depends on our ability to maintain or enhance the current standard of safety in the national airspace system. In a newly expanded white paper that we are releasing today, ALPA has laid out a plan for how we can accomplish this together. And I think you'll enjoy reading that. Do we have copies of that for everybody here today? I don't know if we do or not, but we do. Excellent, okay. ALPA pilots, I want to tell you that, we are solely focused on making the most of the current and future potential of both the space and aviation sectors to drive the economy and build global leadership in technological innovation. And it's damn time we did it again, just like we did it when you all started commercial space activities. We know that neither would be possible if we're not safe. Ultimately, the flying public and everybody involved in each of these activities, we have to be successful. We don't have a choice. We have to win. So whether it's through our work with the ComStack, discussions with leaders from private space companies like SpaceX, comments as part of a regulatory process, or conferences like this one that we're co-hosting here today, ALPA is sharing with the commercial space sector how we've helped make air travel the safest mode of transportation in human history. And I want to thank you for being here today. Your presence makes it abundantly clear, crystal clear, that the commercial space industry is listening to the lessons of the commercial aviation safety team and the experience of airline pilots. I thank you for that. Many of whom fly close to spaceports now or will do so in the future. I mean, it's just going to happen. And I invite you to engage in our discussions here today with an entrepreneurial spirit of collaboration and innovation. And if you do that, if we do that together, we will succeed. Obstacles in the path of the weak become stepping stones of the strong. This is a chance to excel. The Marine in me is coming out now, all right? This is an opportunity. We can solve these problems. We just might have to drag, folks along with us, that's all. We've got to compel and get more resources for the FAA, or have some kind of public-private partnerships, or whatever it's going to take to get over the hurdle. I'll leave that up to greater minds than mine. So the 50-year anniversary of Apollo 11 that we're celebrating was made possible in part by the struggles and successes of the airline industry. I said earlier what Nixon said, hope for humankind in their sacrifice. In the past century of flight, many pilots have sacrificed to make our airspace and our industry as safe as possible for our passengers and our cargo shippers who entrust their lives and their livelihoods to us. And we owe it to them and to the astronauts like Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, who left and returned to Earth safely to make certain their legacy continues for all users of our system. And now, I appreciate your attention. I will invite my friend, President Eric Stallmer, to take the podium. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for those fantastic remarks. A lot of what you highlighted was the collaboration and partnership and a lot of the things that we have in common. And certainly we have far, far more in common than we have not in common. So I think it's great that we will be highlighting a lot of that today. Earlier this morning, when I was working on my fourth cup of coffee, Jeff Faust, who, for the aviation people in the room that do not know Jeff is kind of the dean of the Washington Space Journalist and an avid Nationals fan. I don't see Jeff with the bright lights, but yeah, there he is over there. Jeff asked me, he said, couldn't you have done a little better job on coordinating this conference? I mean, the day after, the World Series and the Nationals winning. And what I told Jeff was, when Joe and I and the ALPA team and my CSF team, when we sat down and got together about this conference, we really took a really analytical look at the calendar and all the events and how we're going to do this. And at the time, the Nationals were 18 and 31. And we took a very, said, hey, with these analytics, I think the World Series is a safe date. So we are pleasantly wrong on that. So that is why, and I want to thank the ALPA folks for putting that extra, 2-gallon vat of coffee out there, because we'll all be doing it, because I know I've been up a little bit late, as my speech will probably reflect, in celebration of this historic win for the Nationals. So, as Joe said, this has really been an incredible year for space in America. Obviously, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of NASA's Apollo 11 mission to the moon, we celebrate that, but as you look around the room more and more, you see that a lot of people weren't around for the Apollo mission. We put people in 2.5 categories. You're either pre-Apollo, post-Apollo, or for some, maybe born somewhere around Apollo 15 in that area. And that's a small segment of us, maybe the 1971ers of us. But not only Apollo, as we look and reflect on the great things, the remarkable achievements that the Apollo missions were, and certainly Apollo 11, but this is also the 30th anniversary of the first ever commercial launch. And with that, 30 years ago, that really started the drive and the creation of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation within the FAA. Some in the space industry didn't realize the FAA did anything else other than commercial space, but apparently there's a whole other branches of the FAA that does aviation things. That's a joke. Yeah, that's a joke. So we have had the opportunity this year, as we said, a lot of milestones this year across the space industry, but one of them has been the opportunity to work with the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation quite closely. The FAA this year released the Notice of Procedural Proposed Rulemaking, the NPRM, and we got to work quite intimately with the FAA on this because this is a watershed moment for us. This is an opportunity for us, for the industry, to kind of rewrite the rule books. The rules that, as we see them now, were written 30 years ago. They're outdated. They don't reflect the technology and the advancements of innovation, of reusability that we have today. It's a really transformative time. And just yesterday, we were over at the FAA meeting with Wayne Monteith, who will be speaking to us later, and just hearing the great work that his office is doing and the reorganization that he has going on and the leadership that he brings there. Joe, as you said earlier about some of our frustrations with our regulators and sometimes with the FAA, I think we all can agree the one thing that we can coalesce on is, and if we can achieve just one thing together, it's streamlining the security line getting into the FAA headquarters. There's no building, maybe short of Fort Knox, that is more difficult in Washington to get into than FAA. So we mentioned that to Wayne yesterday, and that will be our driving moment. But this year, not only the NPRM, not only these great anniversaries that we've had that we got to look back on, this year we've seen many firsts. The first test crewed crewed Dragon to the International Space Station, several licensed flights of the New Shepard to space, and the first launch of a spaceflight participant on Virgin Galactic Spaceship Two Unity. And as Joe and I were talking last night, not only is Joe a partner, but he is possibly a future customer on Spaceship Two. So we're getting a GoFundMe page going for Joe to get Joe into space and cross that off the bucket list for him. But also, within the next few months, we should see commercial flights of all those vehicles, as well as carrying NASA astronauts and paying customers. Within 6 months to a year, we are going to see 4 new human-rated vehicles enter into space with Virgin, Blue Origin, SpaceX, and Boeing with their commercial crew program. This is unprecedented. This is unprecedented times that we're living in. And meanwhile, while this is going on, Rocket Lab is regularly flying the Electron and will launch from the Mars spaceport on Wallops Island. And when I say Mars, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport, they win the prize for most creative name there. Virgin Orbit will also launch its first satellites underneath the wing of a 747 later this year. That is exciting. And it's hard to keep up with how many new small launch vehicle companies are building and testing new rockets to provide cheaper access to space, even as SpaceX is flight testing its first version of the Starship, and Blue Origin is developing the New Glenn. For the Canadians in the room, I was inspired by the, once again, O Canada and the great video. For the Canadians, there's even a company that wants to bring existing Ukrainian rockets to Nova Scotia to help launch satellites. With all this happening in North America, the world's annual gathering of space organizations and agencies, I call this the World Cup for Space because every year it's in a different location all around the world. And for the first time in, I think, 18 or 20 years, it returned back to the United States. This is the International Astronautical Federation Conference, and it took place just up the street at the Washington Convention Center. Over 150 spacefaring nations, or nations with aspirations to go to space, joined, I think, almost 10,000 of us at the convention center to talk about the advancements, the innovation, and the determination of us becoming a more spacefaring global, more spacefaring Earth, I should say, of people. And it was inspiring. You couldn't walk around the room and not see new designs from moon landers and ascent vehicles, and the collaboration of what once was competitive companies, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Blue Origin, all signing an agreement to work together to return Americans back to the moon. It was really quite inspiring. But it's not only the U.S. leading the world in setting this exploration focus on returning to the moon and a stepping stone, which is a stepping stone to Mars. But the U.S. commercial space industry has convinced nations around the globe to stimulate their own entrepreneurs to reach for the heavens. Space agencies that once ridiculed Americans for pursuing reusable rockets as a folly are now trying to figure out how to recover their own boosters and engines, or even intact boosters at the minimum. And throughout this year, but not only this year, the past couple of years, we have gotten excellent leadership from the National Space Council. Under Scott Pace's leadership, and I see his former deputy, Jared Stout, in the room, Jared over there, the National Space Council, which was reconstituted just 2 years ago, and it had been dormant since 1992, I believe, has really hit the ground running. As Joe mentioned, right out of the gate, they've released 4 space policy directives. One on exploration, that we, setting the path forward that we need to go back to the moon. We need to go to Mars. Streamlining streamlining regulations, and especially those in dealing with the launch and reentry and things of that nature, which has somewhat been my life's work lately. Creating a space force, working on space traffic management. How are we going to solve the problem of space traffic management? So it's, again, unprecedented that we've had this type of support in the space industry from an administration. In the 25 years that I have been doing space, I've never seen this type of support, enthusiasm, and dedication from an administration. And I don't mean that in a partisan way. I mean very bipartisan. But the leadership they have provided and working with Congress is unprecedented. And it echoes the theme that this is such a great time to be in the industry. So importantly, the U.S. government's focus on protecting the uninvolved public comes first, and encouraging the innovation to achieve flight safety is being replicated in many other countries through this leadership. So the revolution that my federation, my organization, has championed over the past decade, that has really taken hold here in the U.S., and it's now spreading around the world. And this is great news, not just for humanity, but for our country. We are seeing record levels of investment, private sector investing in this sector. I think this year alone, we'll crest over $5 billion in private sector investment in commercial space companies. Again, another unprecedented number, and the amount of unique companies that these investors, and not your everyday investors, these start from these small angel investors at $10,000 to the large venture capital investments of, as we just saw about 3 weeks ago, $150 million raised for a company, Relativity, that is building a launch vehicle solely out of additive manufacturing, 3D printing. So this spirit, this innovation that is going around, it is spreading. I shouldn't say like wildfire because they're in California. So, but it is really spreading all over the nation. And of course, though, as why we're here today, no progress comes without challenges. Challenges or opportunities, I like to think. But since the Explorer 1 mission in 1958, NASA and the DoD launches have been accommodated by the National Airspace System. It's been going on for over 6 decades. Basically closing off airspace around Cape Canaveral for a shuttle launch, or Vandenberg for a Titan and Delta missions, and so too also for commercial launches from the most part of the past 3 decades. And this was okay. This wasn't a problem when we only had 10 commercial flights. In a good year, we would have 10 commercial flights. But last year alone, we had over 30 commercial flights, and there's a lot more growth to come. And we saw this. And we saw this come to ahead, as Joe mentioned. It was really highlighted with the Falcon Heavy launch in February of 2018. For us, that's the White House. For us in our industry, this was a groundbreaking moment. You had the largest privately funded vehicle ever made launch into space, delivered a payload, which got a lot of publicity, seeing that it was a Tesla, and returned 2 of its boosters safely. We thought this was the greatest thing that could possibly happen. And who knew what others thought of it and said, hey, this is a breaking point. We've got to figure something out. And I think we did. I think that's where we really came together. And this is why CSF has been working so closely with ALPA and other aviation stakeholders for, I guess, now going on 2 years. We had an arc that we put, actually there was 3 arcs that came together, but the one most intimately involved with was the integration of the airspace. And Heidi Williams is here right now, Heidi Williams from NBAA, who co-chaired or the task force. I could give you so many different titles, but the biggest title was really seeing it through, working, from having the seat of the aviation perspective, working with a space company, and the work that Heidi did to help me and our co-chair from A4A get this report through. Again, I can't thank you enough. And that's just a great sign, again, of the different aviation stakeholders and space stakeholders coming together on this. But we got together, we got working with ALPA, and we found, again, our common ground. And what really our common ground is safety and understanding there's going to be more flights. There's going to be more launches. How do we accommodate this? How do we work together to figure out the solution and reduce delays, reduce costs, reduce all these things, and increase efficiency? And that's why a major reason why we are all coming together today and kickstarting this. About, I can't do the math, about 10 years ago, the Ansari X Prize flights on Spaceship One took place, 100 years after Kitty Hawk. And today's government doesn't just let anyone risk the public safety lifting off a rocket. It's very controlled. But we need to be as safe as possible. We need this for the public, for our customers, and for our own bottom lines at the end of the day. Safety has to guide everything we do, and it does, including how we try to more efficiently use the national airspace as we fly through it and get to and from space, because this is only going to increase. So, in sum, I'm thrilled to be working with you, Joe. I'm thrilled to be working with ALPA. I think it is a great relationship, and I think what we are doing collectively from a space perspective, from an aviation perspective, we are going to bring together all of the other stakeholders as partners on this effort. And one thing I did see, I saw firsthand, you often equate your Marine IQ. I have an Army IQ, that's limited to 2 syllables at times. So I need to sometimes see these things. I need to touch it to know what is real. And as part of this member of the ARC, that's what we did. it was one thing all of us getting into a room together and talking about our problems and talking about our issues. But then we said, well, let's see it. Let's go to Dwayne, host us all at the command center out in Warrenton, and see the big picture, literally the big picture of the national airspace. And then our friends at Delta hosted us to see how an airline is run and the day-to-day choreography of just operating an airline, and how a thunderstorm over Kentucky or Georgia can impact hundreds of flights in a small hour, and what they have to do. And then we returned the favor by bringing everyone down to the Cape, and our host from Space Florida, to show what launch operations look like, and why you can't just launch, as convenient as it would sound, but just launch on a Sunday night at 11:30 when there's not much airspace over the Cape, and why orbital mechanics and orbital dynamics matter. And they got to see a SpaceX Falcon 9 takeoff and land, which you don't always get to say. So they understood what our challenges were. And it's through that communication, that education, the collaboration, and that's how we'll have this safe integration of the skies. So with that, I conclude these remarks. I look forward to talking with everyone here in the room. I think we're going to have a great discussion. We have just fantastic leaders from our industry. As I said, we have Wayne Monteith, who's been leading the charge over at FAA and at AST and doing a fantastic job. Scott Pace from the White House with his leadership. Senator Cruz, who has been an immense supporter of ours in the Senate. So I think we have all of our bases covered. We don't have one of the 22 Democratic candidates for president that they're campaigning, but I think we'll also have their support. So, Joe, with that, I thank you. I thank you for your partnership. And most importantly, your friendship. Beyond just the socks and the shoes and the tie, we coordinate on a lot of other things as well. So thank you so much, everyone.